Beneath the magnificent domes and sacred corridors of Vatican City lies something far more enigmatic than meets the eye. While millions of pilgrims journey here each year seeking spiritual connection, few realize that these hallowed walls conceal mysteries that have remained deliberately obscured for generations. From ancient relics whose origins defy explanation to practices that blur the line between faith and deception, the Vatican harbors secrets that challenge our understanding of history itself. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 7 of the most unsettling mysteries locked within the world's smallest sovereign state. What you're about to discover may forever change how you view one of humanity's most powerful institutions. Secret number 1: a conqueror disguised as a saint. Imagine kneeling in prayer before sacred remains, believing you're venerating a holy Christian apostle, only to discover you've actually been praying to one of history's most ambitious military conquerors. This isn't fiction. It's a theory that refuses to die. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, his body became one of the most sought-after relics in the ancient world. Rulers from across the Mediterranean made pilgrimages to his tomb in Alexandria. Julius Caesar himself stood before it. Augustus paid his respects. For generations, Alexander's resting place was documented, visited, and revered. Then, inexplicably, it vanished from history. How does the tomb of the ancient world's most celebrated figure simply disappear? Some historians dismiss this as the inevitable fog of time, but others find the explanation inadequate. The tomb was too important, too well known, too frequently visited to simply fade into obscurity without someone noticing. Enter a controversial hypothesis that sounds like something from a historical thriller. Alexander's mummified remains were smuggled out of Egypt by Venetian merchants during the chaotic medieval period. But here's where the story takes its most audacious turn. These merchants, either through ignorance or deliberate deception, presented the body as the remains of Saint Mark the Evangelist. The body was enshrined with great ceremony in Venice's Basilica di San Marco, where it remains to this day. If true, this represents more than mistaken identity. It suggests a cover-up spanning centuries involving some of the most powerful religious institutions in history. For hundreds of years, the faithful have offered prayers and sought intercession before what they believe to be a Christian saint, when in reality, they may have been venerating a pagan emperor whose ambitions once threatened to reshape the entire known world. The Vatican has never acknowledged this theory, and scientific testing of the remains has faced numerous obstacles. The question lingers: what would such a revelation mean for the authenticity of other relics housed within the Church's most sacred repositories? Secret number 2: an ancient god's blueprint. What if the most influential story in Western civilization wasn't entirely original? This is the uncomfortable question posed by researchers who've spent decades comparing Christian narratives with far older Egyptian mythology. The god Horus, worshipped along the Nile thousands of years before Christianity emerged, lived a life that bears remarkable similarity to the gospel accounts of Jesus Christ. The parallels are so striking that they've sparked intense scholarly debate and outright controversy. According to ancient Egyptian texts, Horus was born to Isis, often described as a virgin goddess, following the death and resurrection of her husband Osiris. The birth took place in secluded circumstances, witnessed by humble shepherds. A celestial event marked his arrival. As he grew into adulthood, Horus gathered followers who became his devoted disciples. He performed miraculous deeds, healing the afflicted, casting out malevolent forces, even restoring life to the dead. The story culminates in betrayal, death, and resurrection after 3 days. Sound familiar? Proponents of what's called the Horus theory argue that early Christians didn't fabricate their central narrative from whole cloth. Instead, they suggest that the Jesus story represents a deliberate adaptation of much older mythological frameworks, repackaged for a new cultural context and spiritual movement. The Catholic Church has vigorously rejected this interpretation, pointing to textual inconsistencies and arguing that similarities between religious narratives are superficial rather than substantive. Egyptian scholars note that some details attributed to Horus in popular theories don't appear in the primary sources. Horus didn't have 12 disciples in the original myths, they argue, and his resurrection story differs significantly from the Christian version. Yet even skeptics acknowledge that certain parallels exist. The question becomes, are these convergences merely the result of universal human storytelling patterns, or do they indicate something more deliberate? A conscious borrowing and transformation of sacred symbols across millennia. The Vatican's archives contain thousands of documents examining the relationship between early Christianity and pagan religions. Many of these texts remain classified, accessible only to a select few scholars with special permission. What insights might they contain about Christianity's actual origins and evolution? Secret number 3. The lost knowledge of Alexandria. In the 3rd century BCE, the city of Alexandria became home to humanity's most ambitious intellectual project, a library intended to collect every written work from every known civilization. Scholars estimate it held between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, containing the accumulated wisdom of Babylonian astronomers, Greek philosophers, Indian mathematicians, Persian physicians, and countless others. Then it disappeared. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria ranks among history's greatest cultural catastrophes. But exactly how it was destroyed remains hotly debated. Some blame Julius Caesar's military campaign in 48 BCE, when fires set during a siege allegedly spread to the library district. Others point to religious zealots who viewed pagan knowledge as dangerous heresy. Still others suggest the library declined gradually over centuries, its content scattered by natural decay and institutional neglect. But there's another theory, one that implicates the Vatican directly. This hypothesis suggests that the library's most valuable texts weren't destroyed at all. Instead, they were deliberately relocated during the early medieval period when Christian authorities consolidated power across the former Roman Empire. According to this view, church officials recognized the strategic importance of controlling knowledge. Manuscripts containing advanced scientific theories, alternative historical accounts, and pre-Christian religious texts were systematically removed from public access. Where did they go? Into the Vatican's secret archives, now known as the Vatican Apostolic Archives. The Vatican maintains one of the world's most extensive private libraries with an estimated 53 miles of shelving holding millions of documents. Access is severely restricted. Even credentialed researchers must navigate Byzantine application processes, and many sections remain entirely off-limits. Church officials insist the archives contain primarily administrative documents, ecclesiastical correspondence, and diplomatic records. But they've also acknowledged possessing medieval manuscripts whose origins remain murky. Could some of these texts trace their lineage back to Alexandria? Could the Vatican be sitting on ancient scientific treatises, mathematical discoveries, and philosophical works that would revolutionize our understanding of pre-Christian civilizations? The Church has never opened its archives for comprehensive independent examination. Until it does, the question will persist. What secrets from antiquity remain hidden in the Vatican's vaults? Secret number 4, treasures seized from a dying civilization. In 1839, Pope Gregory XVI inaugurated the Gregorian Egyptian Museum within the Vatican. Visitors walking through its 9 galleries encounter an impressive collection: statues of pharaohs, hieroglyphic inscriptions, sarcophagi, and mummies. It's presented as a celebration of ancient culture, a testament to the Church's appreciation for human history. But the museum tells a darker story when you examine how these artifacts arrived in Rome. The Vatican's Egyptian collection didn't materialize through archaeological expeditions or scholarly exchange. These objects are spoils of conquest, taken when Roman legions systematically dismantled Egyptian civilization following the defeat of Cleopatra and Mark Antony in 31 BCE. For centuries afterward, Egypt's sacred objects became trophies for Roman elites. Statues of Egyptian deities decorated Roman gardens. Obelisks were transported across the Mediterranean to embellish imperial forums. Mummies were treated as curiosities, displayed at parties or ground into powder for dubious medicinal uses. When Pope Pius VII began assembling his private collection in the Lateran Palace, he was continuing a tradition of appropriation that stretched back to antiquity. The Gregorian Museum formalized this plunder, giving it the veneer of scholarly preservation. Today, Egypt's government actively campaigns for the return of cultural artifacts held by Western institutions. The British Museum's Rosetta Stone, the Nefertiti bust in Berlin, and yes, the Vatican's Egyptian treasures have all been subjects of repatriation demands. The Vatican's response has been consistent silence on the matter. Church officials emphasize their role as custodians preserving human heritage, arguing that these artifacts receive better care in climate-controlled Vatican galleries than they might elsewhere. But this reasoning rings hollow to many. These objects weren't gifted or purchased. They were seized. They represent a civilization that was systematically subjugated, its sacred symbols repurposed to glorify its conquerors. Every mummy in the Vatican Museum was once a person who lived and died, believing their body would rest undisturbed in their homeland for eternity. Instead, they were extracted, transported thousands of miles, and placed on display for tourists. The question remains uncomfortable. Should religious institutions built on principles of justice and compassion continue possessing objects taken through violence and exploitation? Secret number 5. The Gospel They Buried. In the 1940s, archaeologists sifting through ancient trash heaps in Egypt made an extraordinary discovery among discarded tax receipts and mundane correspondence. They found fragments of a text called The First Apocalypse of James, written in ancient Greek with syllable divisions suggesting it was used as a teaching document. This wasn't a newly composed text. Scholars recognized it as part of a collection of early Christian writings that church authorities had systematically suppressed for more than 1,000 years. The First Apocalypse of James presents a vision of reality that contradicts fundamental Catholic doctrine. In this text, Jesus delivers secret teachings to his brother James, revealing that the material world isn't a divine creation but rather a prison constructed by a false deity. This malevolent cosmic entity, sometimes called the demiurge, fashioned physical reality to trap human souls, keeping them ignorant of their true spiritual nature. This worldview, associated with early Christian movements labeled as Gnostic, was declared heretical by church authorities in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Why? Because it fundamentally undermines the church's authority. If the material world is evil, if the God of the Old Testament is actually a deceiver, if salvation comes through secret knowledge rather than institutional religion, then what purpose does the church serve? The Catholic hierarchy responded decisively. Texts promoting these ideas were banned. Possession of such manuscripts became grounds for execution. Libraries were purged. For centuries, these alternative Christian perspectives survived only in fragments mentioned by their opponents or in manuscripts hidden away. The Vatican's archives contain extensive documentation of these suppression campaigns. Church councils debated which texts would be included in the biblical canon and which would be destroyed. Lists were compiled, investigations were launched, books were burned. What's particularly unsettling is recognizing that mainstream Christianity as we know it emerged not through divine revelation, but through political decisions made by flawed human institutions. The version of Jesus' teachings promoted by the Catholic Church represents one interpretation among many that existed in early Christianity. The others were systematically eliminated. How many other texts remain hidden in the Vatican's vaults? What alternative understandings of Christian origins might they reveal? The Church has never allowed comprehensive examination of its holdings, leaving us to wonder what else has been buried. Secret number 6. Medieval forgeries. Displayed as ancient wonders. For centuries, visitors to the Vatican marveled at 2 ancient Egyptian mummies displayed within its halls. These preserved remains, wrapped in linen and housed in protective cases, seem to offer tangible connections to the mysterious civilization of the Nile. Then researchers from the Smithsonian Institution conducted DNA analysis on bone fragments from the wrappings. The results were shocking. These weren't ancient Egyptians at all. They were European medieval remains, only about 500 years old, deliberately wrapped and presented as Egyptian mummies. Someone had created elaborate forgeries, and the Vatican had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, displayed them as authentic antiquities for generations. This discovery reveals something deeply troubling about the provenance of artifacts housed within religious institutions. How did these fakes end up in the Vatican? The most likely explanation traces back to 19th century Europe's obsession with Egyptian culture. During this period, wealthy collectors and institutions desperately sought Egyptian artifacts. Demand so exceeded supply that a black market emerged. Unscrupulous dealers began manufacturing fake mummies using medieval corpses, wrapping them in linen, and selling them to gullible buyers as ancient Egyptian remains. The Vatican, eager to expand its collections and compete with secular museums, apparently fell victim to these schemes. What's perhaps more disturbing is that no one within the church questioned the authenticity of these mummies for well over a century. This raises uncomfortable questions about other artifacts in the Vatican's possession. If forgeries could be displayed for generations without detection, what else in the Church's vast collections might not be what it appears? How many sacred relics venerated by the faithful might be medieval fabrications created to satisfy popular demand? The Church has been notably quiet about this revelation, issuing no comprehensive review of its collections and no public acknowledgement of the broader implications. Secret number 7. Manufacturing miracles. Catholic tradition holds that certain holy individuals are so pure that their bodies don't decay after death. This incorruptibility has long been cited as evidence of sanctity, a physical manifestation of God's favor. But the Vatican has been engineering these miracles for decades. Between 1975 and 2008, a secretive team of embalmers worked within the Vatican, preserving the bodies of at least 31 saints and prominent church figures, using techniques borrowed directly from ancient Egyptian mummification practices. Pope John XXIII, who died in 1963, provides the most striking example. His body, displayed in a glass coffin, appears remarkably well preserved even decades after death. The Vatican attributes this to divine intervention. In reality, it's the result of sophisticated embalming procedures carried out discreetly by Vatican specialists. This revelation fundamentally undermines the Church's claims about miraculous preservation. When believers kneel before these seemingly incorrupt bodies, drawing spiritual inspiration from what they perceive as divine signs, they're actually viewing the results of human chemical intervention. The practice hasn't always succeeded. When Pope Pius XII died in 1958, embalmers attempted to preserve his body using methods meant to mirror Jesus' burial, wrapped in linen and sealed in an enclosed space. The procedure catastrophically failed. The corpse decomposed rapidly, emitting such foul odors that guards stationed nearby reportedly fainted. The Pope's nose literally fell off. Yet even after this disaster, the Vatican continued the practice, simply refining its techniques while maintaining public silence about the procedures. This raises profound theological questions. If the Church is willing to artificially create the appearance of miracles, what does that say about its relationship with truth? How can believers trust institutional claims about the supernatural when church officials are actively manipulating natural processes to manufacture evidence of divine intervention? The Vatican has never openly acknowledged the full extent of these embalming programs. Documents exist confirming the practice, but church officials decline to discuss the theological implications. Conclusion: these 7 secrets reveal a pattern. An institution built on principles of truth and transparency, systematically concealing, manipulating, and controlling information to maintain its authority and influence. From potentially misidentified relics to suppressed texts, from plundered artifacts to manufactured miracles, the Vatican's history is far more complicated than its carefully curated public image suggests. This doesn't necessarily invalidate individual faith or diminish the genuine spiritual experiences of millions of believers. But it does demand that we approach religious institutions with the same critical scrutiny we apply to any human organization wielding enormous power. The Vatican's secrets remind us that history is written by the victorious, that narratives are shaped by those with the authority to control them, and that truth often remains hidden behind walls, both literal and metaphorical. What other mysteries remain locked within those sacred corridors? What revelations might emerge if the Vatican's archives were truly opened to independent examination? Until that day comes, we can only speculate about what else remains deliberately obscured in one of the world's most secretive institutions.